The phone rang late that evening, shattering the silence that had hung heavy in the air. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in this house for years, and yet, tonight, it seemed almost predestined. For 10 long years, the house had been empty of the laughter that once echoed from its walls. The child who had once filled every corner of the home with joy had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a mother's aching heart. The caller ID flashed a name she hadn't seen in over a decade. Her hand trembled as she lifted the receiver, her heart pounding in her chest. She had long given up hope of ever hearing from him again. But then the voice came. Soft but unmistakable. "I'm coming home," he said. His voice was older, tinged with a slight hesitation, yet it carried a certainty that sent shivers down her spine. The words were a mixture of surprise, relief, and something darker she couldn't quite place. Her breath caught in her throat. Was it really him? Her boy, the one she had loved and cared for, the child who had been ripped away from her without a word? The silence in the room was deafening as she waited for more, but the line went quiet. There was no explanation, no apology, just the promise of his return. A decade had passed, but the questions remained unanswered. Why had he disappeared? Had he been searching for her all this time, or had he been lost in a world of his own? What had kept him away for so long? As the seconds ticked by, the weight of the unanswered question pressed heavily on her heart. Why was he coming back now? The boy's return wasn't just a reunion, it was a mystery that would unravel secrets long buried, revealing truths that neither of them were prepared to face. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the boy standing on the other side of this reunion would not be the same child she had once cared for. Before the world outside had a chance to change him, he was just a boy. And for the first few years of his life, his world had been small, safe, and full of love. His nanny, Eleanor, had been his protector, his teacher, and his mother figure. A woman who had been there when he took his first steps, when he said his first words, and when he experienced the world's wonder for the very first time. Eleanor was older, wise beyond measure, and had a softness in her that made him feel safe in a way he had never known before. She had a calming presence, always knowing when he needed a hug, a comforting word, or just someone to listen. Her voice was the first he learned to recognize, the one that soothed him when the world seemed too loud. The house was filled with small memories, each one a snapshot of his childhood. Laughter in the kitchen as they baked cookies, stories shared before bedtime, and the sound of rain tapping against the windows as they sat together, drinking tea and watching the storm pass. Eleanor's world and his were intertwined, a seamless blend of love and care that felt unbreakable. He had never known a different kind of love, one that was not fierce and unyielding. Eleanor had always been there, her love for him unconditional, a constant in a world that could be unpredictable. She was more than just a nanny to him, she was family. She took him to the park on sunny afternoons, taught him how to read, and instilled in him a sense of responsibility that was beyond his years. To him, she was the heartbeat of the house, the one person he could count on no matter what. And in return, he gave her his trust, his heart, and his undivided attention. There was no one else he would rather spend time with. To him, Eleanor was the world. She was the anchor that held him steady, the one who made every day feel like an adventure. As he grew older, their bond only deepened. But in the back of his mind, something remained, something he didn't fully understand, something that would eventually pull them apart. It had been a normal afternoon when the world as they knew it came to an end. Eleanor had prepared his favorite lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, just like she always did. They had eaten together, laughed at his silly jokes, and shared stories of what they hoped to do once the summer break began. It was a routine they both cherished, a quiet routine that spoke volumes about their bond. But then the doorbell rang. It was an unremarkable sound, one that had often been the prelude to visits from friends, family, or the deliverman. But this time it was different. The visitor at the door was a stranger, someone Eleanor had never seen before. He wore a sharp suit and a cold, unblinking expression. In his hand, he carried nothing more than a piece of paper. Eleanor had no idea what he wanted, but the moment he mentioned the boy's name, a chill ran down her spine. His words were clipped and formal, and his presence filled the room with an unsettling tension. "You need to come with me," he said, his voice steady but commanding. It was then that she knew something was wrong. The boy, who had been playing in the living room only moments before, was gone. The stranger's words felt like a hammer to her chest. "He's been taken," the man explained, though his eyes avoided hers. "The authorities are involved. We'll keep you updated." Just like that, without a single goodbye, without a moment of warning, he was gone. The boy she had raised, the boy who had known no one but her for years, had been taken from her. In the days that followed, the search was frantic. The police arrived, asking questions, reviewing the house for any signs of a struggle, but there was nothing. No clue, no evidence, no trail to follow. Eleanor spent hours on the phone, talking to anyone who might have known where he went, but the silence that answered her questions was deafening. The boy had disappeared as quietly as he had entered her life. Gone without a trace. It didn't make sense. He wasn't old enough to leave on his own. He didn't have the means, the motive, or the intention. So what happened? The mystery of his disappearance plagued Eleanor every day. She couldn't understand why anyone would take him, or why he hadn't reached out. But with every passing day, as the search grew colder and the months turned into years, she realized something deeper was at play. There was more to this story than anyone had let on. There was something, some reason she couldn't yet comprehend, that kept the boy away from her. And as the years passed, the mystery only deepened. The years without Eleanor were long and marked by a quiet loneliness that never seemed to fade. At first, the boy had hoped it was just a misunderstanding, a temporary separation. Surely he thought someone would come for him. But no one did. He was taken to a different home, a place he didn't recognize, surrounded by unfamiliar faces. The people were kind enough, but they were strangers to him, and their warmth was never enough to fill the empty space left in his heart. His new life was sterile, like the walls of the house where he now lived. There were no warm meals, no laughter shared over simple things, and most importantly, there was no Eleanor. Her absence felt like a constant ache, a wound that never quite healed. The boy had been too young to fully understand why he was taken away, but as he grew older, the questions piled up. Why had he been taken from the only woman who had ever cared for him? What had happened to the world he once knew? He found himself lost in memories of her, of the soft glow of her presence, the way her voice had always reassured him, and the simple comfort of knowing she was always there. Those thoughts became his refuge, a way to hold on to the only love he had ever known. But they also became a source of pain because he could never understand why it had to end. As time passed, he grew more withdrawn, more quiet. He excelled in school, but only because it was a distraction, a way to bury the pain of missing her. He became adept at hiding his emotions, pretending everything was fine on the outside, while on the inside, he longed for the love and security that had been ripped away from him. He would often stare out of his bedroom window, imagining what his life might have been like if things had turned out differently. Would Eleanor still be there? Would they have continued their simple, joyful routine? Or had she moved on, her life completely separate from his? And yet, there was always a flicker of hope inside him, a belief that one day he would find his way back to her, that somehow the universe would guide him home. But with each passing year, that hope began to fade. The boy grew into a young man, and the innocence of his childhood slowly slipped away, replaced by the harsh realities of life. He tried to fill the void with friendships, with hobbies, and with new experiences, but nothing ever felt complete. The hole in his heart remained, and the questions about his past were always there, unanswered. Still, there was always a part of him that couldn't forget. No matter how far he went, no matter how many years passed, the memories of Eleanor lingered in his mind. It was as if her love was a part of him, woven into his very being. The boy may have been gone, but the connection he had with her would never fade. The search for answers became a quiet obsession. Who had taken him? And more importantly, why? He needed to know the truth. He couldn't live with the unanswered questions any longer. The mystery that had haunted him for so long was something he could no longer ignore. The boy had grown, but his journey was far from over. The mystery of his past had only begun to unravel, and the truth about his separation would soon come to light. The knock at the door came in the middle of another quiet evening. Eleanor sat by the window, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the empty street. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to truly hope for anything, but tonight, for reasons she couldn't explain, the quiet felt different. The weight of the years seemed to hang in the air, thick with the kind of anticipation she hadn't felt in ages. And then there was a knock. It wasn't hurried or frantic, but it was a knock that sent a rush of emotions flooding through her. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a brief moment she was paralyzed, unsure of what to do. Her instincts told her it was nothing. Maybe a stranger, maybe a neighbor, someone she didn't know. But a deeper part of her, the part that had been quietly waiting for this moment all these years, told her something else. She opened the door. There, standing in the dim light of the porch, was a man. Tall, with broad shoulders and a face she barely recognized but knew so well. His features were older now, sharper than the boy she had once known. His eyes, though, were the same, deep, filled with the same questions and fears that had haunted her for years. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Time seemed to freeze between them, the silence stretching longer than it should. Her eyes searched his face as if trying to make sense of what had just appeared before her. And then he spoke. His voice was deeper now, but still held the softness of a child, the familiar tone she had longed to hear. "Eleanor," he whispered, almost as if testing the sound of her name on his lips. Tears welled up in her eyes instantly. It had been so long, too long. The flood of emotions hit her all at once. Anger, confusion, joy, sorrow, all mixed together into a tidal wave that threatened to overwhelm her. But despite the overwhelming rush of feelings, one thing stood out above all. The boy, her boy, was here. He had come back. "Eli, is it really you?" Her voice cracked, filled with disbelief and wonder. She reached out hesitantly, as though afraid he might disappear if she touched him. He nodded slowly, his eyes searching her face for the reaction he had been dreading. "It's me," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to find you before." She stepped forward, her hands trembling, and pulled him into a tight embrace. His warmth was familiar, his scent the same, and yet there was so much about him that had changed. The boy who had left was no more, replaced by the young man who stood before her. But even in this new form, he was still the same child she had raised. For a long moment they stood there, in the embrace of a reunion that was long overdue. There were no words, no explanations. Just the sheer presence of one another, filling the empty space between them that had lingered for so long. But as the reality of their reunion sank in, Eleanor felt a question rising in her chest, one she had kept hidden for years. Why? Why had he stayed away for so long? What had happened? But for now, that question would remain unspoken, because in this moment, nothing else mattered but that they were together again. The evening passed quietly, the room filled with the gentle hum of time reclaiming its place. Eleanor and Eli sat together, the space between them now filled with warmth and a comfort they had both longed for. Yet, beneath the surface of their reunion, a sea of emotions swirled, untamed and raw. Words seemed inadequate to bridge the gap that had spanned a decade. Eleanor looked at Eli, studying his face, the face of the boy who had once been her world. There were traces of the child she had known, but the young man before her had been shaped by a life she hadn't been part of. His eyes held a depth, an understanding that could only come from years of experience, years of unanswered questions and empty spaces. Her heart ached as she reached out and gently cupped his face in her hands. "I never stopped thinking about you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never stopped wondering where you were, what happened to you. I thought I lost you forever." Tears welled up in Eli's eyes and he looked away, his fingers gripping the edge of the chair. The silence between them felt heavy, each word a weight they hadn't yet learned to carry. The boy he once was and the man he had become were still learning to coexist. "I didn't want to leave you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't understand why it happened. Why I had to leave. For so long, I blamed myself." Eleanor's heart broke as she watched him struggle with the words. She had always known that the separation had been as painful for him as it had been for her, but hearing him say it aloud only deepened the sorrow. The boy she had raised, the boy who had never been far from her heart, had lived with that guilt for years. And now, here they were, both standing on the precipice of their shared pain, unable to fully grasp the truth of what had kept them apart. "You were just a child," Eleanor said softly, her voice soothing but firm. "None of this was your fault. You didn't choose this. We didn't choose this." Eli's eyes finally met hers, and in them she saw something she had missed for so long, a flicker of hope, of understanding. "I know," he said, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. "But I still feel like I should have done something. Like I should have fought harder. I don't even know how it all happened. Everything was so blurry." Eleanor nodded, her own memories of those days clouded by fear and confusion. The authorities had never fully explained why he was taken, and the years without him had been filled with endless questions. Even now, there was a part of her that couldn't quite reconcile the events of the past. The boy she had raised had vanished into the unknown, and in his place, a stranger had returned, a young man who had been shaped by his own journey, by his own trials and tribulations. "I wanted to be there for you," she whispered. "I wanted to be the one to help you through all of it. I wanted to protect you." "But you did," Eli replied, his voice stronger now, filled with a quiet conviction. "You protected me in the only way you could. I never forgot you, Eleanor. No matter how far I went, you were always with me. In my heart. Every step of the way." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. The pain of those lost years, the questions that had haunted her, all seemed to melt away with his reassurance. In that moment she realized that the time apart, though painful, had not broken the bond between them. It had only strengthened it. The years they had spent apart had been hard, on both of them. But now, as they sat together, they understood that the most important thing was not the time lost, but the love that had never faltered. It had always been there, waiting for them to find their way back to each other. "I never stopped loving you, Eli," she said, her voice filled with both pain and joy. "And I never will." Eli reached across the table, taking her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was the touch of a child who had returned home, of a man who had found his way back to the woman who had been his guiding light. "I know," he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "And now we have the chance to start again. To rebuild everything." For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a sense of peace settle over her. The mystery, the confusion, and the pain of the past still loomed, but in this moment, it no longer mattered. They were together again, and that was all that mattered. The air in the room felt heavy, as though something was about to shift. Despite the reunion, despite the flood of emotions they had shared, there was an unspoken tension that lingered between Eleanor and Eli. He had returned, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he hadn't told her, something that still lay buried in the past. They had talked about his childhood, about the years they had lost, but Eli's eyes would occasionally dart away, as if there was something he couldn't say. Eleanor had noticed it. The way he sometimes paused before answering a question. The way his fingers would tremble when she spoke about the time they had been separated. There was a secret, and she could feel it. It was only a matter of time before it came to light. Eleanor had never been one to push, never one to demand answers when someone wasn't ready to share. But now, as the silence stretched between them, she couldn't help but wonder if the truth was something she needed to hear, something that would finally explain the years they had lost. Eli stood up from his chair, pacing the room, his mind seemingly miles away. He had been trying to gather the courage to say what he had kept hidden for so long, but the words always felt like a weight he couldn't carry. Finally, he stopped and turned toward her. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat, her eyes locking onto his. She had known this moment would come, the moment when the past, the questions, the silence would finally come to the surface. But she wasn't prepared for what he was about to reveal. "The truth is," Eli said, swallowing hard, "I didn't leave. I was taken." Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her. "Taken?" The words hung in the air, impossibly heavy. She had never truly believed that Eli would have willingly left. Not after everything they had shared. But taken, what did that mean? She stood up quickly, her mind racing. "Taken? What do you mean? Who took you? Why didn't you try to reach out? Why didn't you?" "I couldn't," Eli interrupted, his voice breaking. "I didn't have a choice. They made me forget everything. At first, I didn't know what was happening. They told me I was someone else. They gave me a new name, a new life. I was raised to believe that I wasn't your son, that you didn't want me." Eleanor felt a wave of nausea wash over her. They made him forget? The boy she had raised, the child she had loved, had been rewritten. How could anyone do that? How could anyone take away someone's identity like that? "Who did this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Who would do such a thing to you? To us?" Eli's eyes darkened as he looked at her. "The people who took me weren't ordinary people, Eleanor. They were part of a group that, I'm not sure how to explain it, but they have power, and they've been doing this for years. Taking children, manipulating memories, erasing lives. I've spent years trying to piece together what happened. I didn't even know who I was for a long time." Eleanor's mind was spinning. She had always suspected there was more to Eli's disappearance, but she never imagined anything like this. The thought that a group, some shadowy, powerful organization, had been behind his kidnapping, that they had erased his memories, was too much to comprehend. "I don't know why they targeted me," Eli continued, his voice growing more desperate. "But I've been trying to find the truth for years. I've been trying to remember, to make sense of everything. And now, after all this time, I know I was meant to come back to you." Eleanor stood frozen, her mind racing as she processed his words. A part of her wanted to deny it all, to pretend that this couldn't be true. But looking into Eli's eyes, she saw the pain, the torment he had carried for so long. He wasn't lying. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a reckoning. A revelation that would change everything they knew about the past, and everything they thought they understood about their lives. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Eli took a deep breath, his expression hardening with determination. Now we find out who did this. We find the people who stole my life. And we make them pay. The days after Eli's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions and realizations. The truth about his kidnapping, the shadowy organization that had taken him, and the years spent in the dark had shaken them both to the core. But through the storm of uncertainty, one thing remained clear: the bond between them had not been broken. It had only been tested, stretched, and strengthened by the years they had been apart. Eleanor and Eli spent hours talking, piecing together the fragmented memories of his childhood, trying to understand the forces that had ripped their lives apart. It was a slow and painful process, but each moment of clarity, each revelation brought them closer. The secrets of the past no longer held power over them. Together they began to reclaim what had been lost. As time passed, they found a new rhythm, a new sense of normalcy. It wasn't perfect, there were still unanswered questions, still a lingering sense of betrayal and pain, but there was hope. Hope that they could rebuild, hope that they could heal, and most importantly, hope that they could be the family they had always meant to be. Eli was different now. The boy who had been lost to her for so long had returned as a man, shaped by experiences that had torn him apart but also made him stronger. Eleanor saw the scars on his heart, but she also saw the resilience, the determination to move forward. One evening, as they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and purple, Eleanor turned to Eli. The weight of everything that had happened seemed to settle into the quiet space between them. She placed her hand on his, a simple gesture, but one that held more meaning than words could express. "I never gave up on you," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotions that swirled inside her. "I never stopped believing we would find each other again." Eli looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. "I never gave up on you either. You were always with me. In my heart." The years they had lost could never be regained. The time, the memories, the moments of joy and pain that had been stolen from them, those things would never be returned. But what they had now, what they were building, was something they could hold on to. Something that could never be taken from them again. "We have the rest of our lives," Eli said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "And this time we won't let anything tear us apart." Eleanor smiled, the years of heartache and longing finally melting away, replaced by the warmth of her son's presence. She knew there would be challenges ahead. They would face the shadows of the past and uncover the truth about who had stolen their lives, but for the first time in years she felt ready to face it all. Together. With the sun setting in front of them, they sat in silence, no longer haunted by what was lost, but filled with the quiet promise of a future rebuilt by love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between mother and child. They had found their way back to each other, not just physically but emotionally. And that was enough.